Hello friends, well done brothers. By God's grace, we are already here in the week 7, the final week of our learning together. God has been so gracious in being with and leading us onward, despite the various kinds of high wave-like challenges. The ecumenical canoe in which we travel could ride the waves, and we are just about to touch the shore. And along the seashore, we usually see falis or burres or maniabas, where we usually meet together as our members of the churches or our extended families, families together and friends. We sit and we talk about our daily life, whereby we connect ourselves with the land, with the ocean and the sky. And actually in Fijian words, Vanuva, the land, also Tika Tika, the community, or those who dwell in a particular place. Those two words, Vanuva, Tika Tika, are very much connected. So integrated are our lives and daily activities of our lives in the community. And quite often, as we walk along the sea wall, we see the blue ocean that reminds of our calling as the salt of the earth. However, we see if the salt is placed as beautiful barrels, it is of no use. Salt must be mixed with water, mixed with food, to give taste or to preserve food for a longer period and so on. But our institutions or our churches remain like the salt barrels, so beautiful, yet quite self-centered quite often. We take our callings and opportunities, our skills and talents, our leadership positions and the power to gain something for our own selves or for our own churches, leaving the needs and the issues of our communities unattended, sadly so. Quite a number of us in our families are interested in migrating, for instance, in Vanuatu or in Fiji Islands or in Solomon Islands or Samoa. We are interested in migrating or making our people to even buy passports as it is in Vanuatu and in other islands and so on, so that we can move away from our islands, leaving our communities and their needs unattended. And because of the possibilities for travel across the islands and do trades and so on, we keep moving on. Now, even the multinational companies that come to our places, if they lose profit, they keep moving. And that exploits our labor. Quite a number of our young people are losing jobs. And we also encounter challenges like losing our culture, our languages, our very enriching values of life. And we have seen how secularization makes us really to differentiate the sacred spaces from the secular, or the sacred timings. Sunday for church, the rest is to be different in the community life. And that kind of differentiating and then rationalizing, giving an explanation and justification really makes us not to be able to attend the impacts of globalization and secularization in our places, in our islands, in the Pacific and also beyond. When salt is added to food, the food becomes tasty and more nourishing. When salt is added or connected to the wounds, wounds are healed. or when it is mixed with food, it can be preserved for a longer period. So also, the church being called as the salt, we ourselves can also come together and we pull our talents, our gifts, the ideas and visions that God has given to us, and if we connect it with the rest of the community can be healed from its pain and suffering. The community can be preserved, can inherit life everlasting. And this is the right moment for us to really to act. In our acting, in this right opportune, right time, in Kairos, we have to both resist the unhelpful impacts. At this moment, we talk about globalization and secularization. We have to resist whatever impacts that of globalization and secularization that really distorts or diminishes or destroys life. And on the other hand, this is the right time, or Kairos, to seek alternatives that can heal, alternative approaches, alternative action plans that can really advocate and promote, affirm and appreciate life. And we know that God is making everything and everyone and every community, beginning with our families, anew. God is the God of transformation and change in a constructive manner. And I have shared somewhere with you earlier, in my kind of long-term doctoral study, I have seen how God's grace is expressed in Hinduism and also in other religions. We see God's grace extended to everybody in the cosmos. And God's justice or righteousness belongs to everyone of God's creation or God's family. And therefore, we need to recognize that there are some positive advantages that we also see, despite the negative impacts of, for instance, secularization. You can see in secularization, when it comes to desacralizing, we can see that it in a way helps us to see that everyone is special, or no one is special. Everyone is ordinary, and in their ordinary life, when they exercise their roles in a way that helps life, he or she becomes special, not in the other way around, as if some are sacred, or some places and sometimes are sacred. Every place, every time, and every person is in God's image. And also we can see globalization also brings us to come together across borders. We can travel and we can communicate. We can exchange and we can utilize the resources in utilizing or seeking and implementing alternatives to the current negative impacts of globalization or secularization. And I think we need to now be very sure, very clear that God's grace transforms the current death-dealing kind of paradigms. And God's grace continuously sows the seeds of change or liberation. And we are invited, we are called to discover these new seeds of liberation or change, and the new strands or new threads or new parts of the pattern, or Mamanu, as we around Toyelu quite often talks about. We need to find out the enriching parts in a pattern design and add that to our family life or community life. Thus, we can see that there are positive advantages in globalization and secularization. We can utilize them in seeking alternatives for the kingdom of God. And we, because of the gracious God's acts in our lives and through our lives in the community, we are compelled to come out of our apathy, our frustrations, our even limitations, and to engage in God's act of transforming the present life-diminishing or life-destroying patterns, and to engage in God's act of making everything new. Friends, in this week, through our writing or reading and reflecting, of course, writing of the various reflection papers, the special reflection paper particularly, let us continue to analyze, to evaluate and synthesize the various issues that are emerging due to globalization and secularization. Let us also continue to discover the various changes that are brought in association with these processes of globalization and secularization in our individual lives, in our institutions, and in the society. And let's see what causes them to happen, these changes, and also continue to see in what ways ourselves, our personal, our social, our spiritual, political, as well as cultural context can influence and cause a positive, life-affirming transformation when it comes to these changes, in addressing these changes. Let us also continue to take responsibility and also help others, especially our fellow leaders and also members of the congregations and ecumenical institutions wherever we work, to really discover and introduce various kinds of effective strategies that can help to address these different impacts, the positive and the negative, coming from globalization and secularization. In all these, when we analyze, when we devise a strategy and so on, let us always focus on and adhere to or embrace life-giving or life-affirming vision. That is the vision of oikumene, or the vision of a community that connects ourselves in a just manner, in a very sustainable manner, with one another, with God especially, and also with rest of the creation. Let us also see that the vision of oikumene or ecumenism as the vision that alone brings in dignity to all of God's creation. Let us keep this in mind. I would also like to give after this, continuously with this video clip, some slides on particular initiatives that I could also take in a particular congregation in South India. These are some samples and some writings and reflections that could help us as with inspiration and encouragement in our journey of designing together collectively with others effective strategies in relating to and addressing the issues particularly of globalization and secularization. May God continue to be with us in our life, in our study, in our ministries, and let us continue to be the lighted candles. Allow the spirit of truth, spirit of life and encouragement to continue to kindle us and to be active in our ministries and witnesses. And only the lighted candles can light other candles. So God bless. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the honor. Thanks. God bless. God of life, God of love, and God of wisdom wonderfully and very strategically brings us from different families in a village or in a city, wherever we live, and make us to assemble regularly to connect with God, the fountain of life, in a worship service and thus become a channel of God's grace to others, so we return and serve others in local communities. Hence, churches may be called and known as congregation-based communities. Congregation-based community is a vision God inspired in my early ministry when serving in a congregation in a local village called Chindanvilai in South India. In turn, I shared it with my other members in the congregation, eventually to blossom as a distinct element within God's mission called congregation-based community. I continue to share this vision and experience wherever the Lord leads me, with my friends in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in North America, and in these days for the past 16, 17 years in the Pacific today. Brothers, I believe that you have a copy of my book titled as Building Up the Body of Christ. It is a book on Christian education with transforming and holistic Christ-centered approach in Christian education. For our purpose, we will refer to chapter 7 in this book from pages 51 to 56. Chapter 7, pages 51 to 56 on congregation-based communities. Congregation-based communities. The vision for congregation-based communities evolved or emerged from the various understandings in our Christian life and ministry. First, from the understanding that God is present and God reigns everywhere, and God reigns in every moment of life. Secondly, all people belong to God. All of us are God's children. There is no special people in God's sight. Thirdly, God's grace and God's justice is meant for all. Our God extends God's grace and God does God's justice to everyone, particularly everyone in a community. Fourth basis is our understanding that God's mission starts with people in pain, all people in a village, in a community, not only just the members of a congregation. Fifth one, all ministries of a congregation must therefore be related to the socio-political, cultural, and other issues of people and each person living in a particular community in a local context. All ministries exercised by a local congregation must be related to the issues of the people in that community. Finally, all members must be enabled to address local daily life issues through their continued traditional programs of ministry, such as men's fellowship or women's fellowship or youth fellowship, the children's ministries and the like, plus any other programs that could be set both by the congregation members as well as the other members in a local community. All members must be enabled to address local daily life issues through the traditional and new programs of ministry. The theology that serves as the foundation, the base, and the springboard for congregation-based communities is taken from the Gospel according to Mark. His theology, a theology of suffering, qualifies a theology of glory. It is a theology of suffering that qualifies a theology of glory. Its various aspects include, first, the power and the greatness and the glory of Jesus be understood only within the framework of Jesus' compassionate life, ministry, suffering, death, and resurrection. Secondly, the purpose of Jesus' coming is worked out only through his humiliating suffering. And also his followers must be prepared for similar or such hardships and persecutions and hardships and challenges in resisting injustice in daily life. Actually, Mark very carefully pricks out the balloon of what we call today the health, wealth, or the prosperity theology.